Today's episode is brought to you by NordPass, an easy-to-use yet advanced password manager that makes online activities easier and safer. With NordPass, you won't find business account passwords in notebooks or shared files, and you won't need to find a physical company's credit card to share its details with your colleague. That's because NordPass allows all team members to store, manage, and share credentials and other sensitive data securely and conveniently. Beyond that, NordPass quickly identifies weak passwords, monitors data breaches, and gives you full control over who has access to company resources. And check this out. You can now get the NordPass Teams or Business Plan with 30% off. Just go to nordpass.com and use the code SWISSPRENEUR at checkout. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Again, that's nordpass.com, code SWISSPRENEUR.
There's a reason why Roger Federer is sort of the role model of Switzerland. It's not just because he's good looking, but he's like the champ, right? And that's what we actually sort of maybe secretly wish for many things, right? I think we're actually quite a competitive people.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Silvan.
Marcel, a very warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure, but also a big honor to have you as a guest today.
Pleasure's mine.
You are a professor at EPFL, a startup founder yourself, an investor in startups, but after all, also a digital epidemiologist. You have an incredible and a remarkable career that we're going to talk about. And if we go back in time, you got your PhD in biology and environmental sciences from ETH, and then you went on to do your postdoctoral research at Stanford. First of all, why did you choose Stanford and what were you researching there?
Yeah, I just always want to be where the action is. In whatever I work, I always wonder, where's the most action, where are things really happening? And at the time, I already had a bit of a leg in the whole sort of exploding web arena at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so to me, it was clear, okay, I have to go to Silicon Valley because there I have this perfect mix of a university at the cutting edge and the technology development at the cutting edge. So to me, it was just clear I have to be there.
You actually then stayed there in the US for 8 years in total. And you also taught at Penn State, you were at Bronco Weiss Fellow, and you even participated in Y Combinator. So first of all, do you look back fondly to these days and this time?
Yeah, very fondly. I mean, both for professional reasons and for personal reasons. We then had our kids there, and so we just actually went back for half a year for sabbatical, San Diego, but somewhat similar area. Yeah. And there's definitely sort of two hearts beating in our chests, one the Swiss and one the American or the Californian maybe. Really wanted to go back to California. Although we had a very good time on the East Coast as well. I mean, it's overall a wonderful country. I encourage everybody to travel a bit around and not just stick in the bubble of Silicon Valley, which is amazing, but there's so many other great aspects about the area. No, I'm very fondly looking back.
And how has this time, these 8 years in the US, how have they shaped you and also changed you as a person and professional?
Yeah, mostly, I mean, the Silicon Valley experience, of course, is I think very profound to most Europeans who go there, even those of us who already consider themselves, driven and motivated. You go there and it's just a different beast, right? Yeah. And you realize what is possible. Then, of course, as a European, you also see things that you think aren't really what you want. And, maybe we can discuss that as well. But overall, right, there's just this incredible energy. And that is something I try to take with me now wherever I go. Yeah. And it's something that I think is generally quite important. I always make the example that let's say you go to Italy and you walk into some, coffee shop and you get a coffee and it's just going to be this incredible coffee, right? That you can't get anywhere in the world. So why is that, right? Do they have better beans or something? No, it's just because there is a system that just does not tolerate bad coffee, right? Everybody expects that. And similarly, in Silicon Valley, everybody expects that you invent the future. And so this just you just walk into this environment where everybody has these expectations. Like it's clear that's what we're gonna do. Yeah. If you don't invent the future, then what are you doing here? Right?
You're wasting your time.
Exactly. And so that's right. I'm trying to create this kind of sort of expectation now in certainly a smaller scale wherever I go and where I start new projects, right? That people really, I think people really respond also very positively and strongly if you create this vision and the expectation and then they deliver.
Absolutely. And was this really lacking here in Switzerland? And that's also one of the reasons why you went to the US, to really experience this sort of surrounding of ambitious people and this will of changing the future?
I think it's sometimes a little lacking. We still have too much of this, of the more conservative nature that wants to keep things as it is and so on. I mean, there's also value in that, right? One shouldn't, the classical fence problem, right? You're in a field, you arrive at a fence. Don't just tear it down, right? Ask like, who put it up there and why? There's probably a good reason, right? But sometimes after many generations, it gets completely forgotten why this fence is there. And it actually makes no more sense. But people just say, please don't touch this fence. It has always been there. It has served as well. Yeah. And you just need to really sort of ask a little bit, okay, why are things here? And I think in Switzerland, we're sometimes a bit too conservative and not asking, do we really still need this?
Yeah, fair. And to build the future, then also participate in Y Combinator, seen as sort of the holy grail for many startups, trying to get in there in the program. How did you experience Y Combinator and how did it help you on your startup journey?
Well, it was a very humbling experience because basically we got in, which was great. And then we essentially got our asses kicked, if I can say that on air. But, that's what happened. And but it was also... I mean, we very quickly understood why the thing that we were building wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And we also very quickly understood that potentially, right, there was actually a sort of lethal aspect to it. I mean, not something that you could fix easily. Now, what I learned there is that you have this very direct and very fast impact with reality, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas here, sometimes I feel like things are kept alive for years and years and years. Whereas there, right, after 3-4 months, it was clear, you're dead, right? Yeah. Stop, do something else, use your energy, do something else. And of course, it wasn't a problem at all because it's kind of the expectation because 90% will fail. Yeah. So I'm taking that with me and I wish, I now become much more proactive to say, this doesn't work, right? We have to shut this down. We have to stop this. And, this whole sort of, opportunity cost and, sunk cost. I mean, I don't believe in it, right? Just stop it and put your energy into the future, basically, of something that could work.
Absolutely. And what you then did is, after all this experience in the US, you decided to come back to Switzerland. We're also here in Geneva now recording this session. Why did you decide to come back? Because from what I heard, the US really shaped you. You had a great time there. You were surrounded by amazing, ambitious people. Why come back to Switzerland?
Well, because Switzerland has shaped me before, right? Sure. I'm still, I guess, a Swiss boy at the end of the day. And I, over time, saw that there are many great aspects about this American way of approaching certain things. But I also realized those aspects are actually quite portable, right? You can take them with you because fundamentally it's an attitude. Whereas I realized the things I started to not like about the US were not portable, right? They were infrastructure things, so societal setups, the way you think about poor or elderly or, just people who are maybe not doing so well. Yeah. And so I said, okay, it probably makes sense to go back to Switzerland because there I have the infrastructure that is not portable and I have to take the American spirit with me, right? And that is possible, but the other direction is not possible. So that's why we decided to come back. And then, of course, I also had this wonderful offer at EPFL.
So sort of combining the best out of two worlds.
Exactly.
To a certain degree.
And we heard you were an entrepreneur yourself with your startup. You're also a professor. Which one is stronger in your heart, the professor or the entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably a mix of both. I have extreme respect for both sides, right? I understand, that there are these professors that can't do nothing else. Sort of the classical, even sort of movie professor, right? Completely confused about the world, but it's just focusing on this one thing, and it will dig deep and it will find things that none of us could find. I have a great respect for that. Sometimes incredible things come out of this, right? Like, for example, CRISPR, which was discovered by scientists who wondered how the hell, bacteria were defending against viruses, which is something, very basic science. And now it's sort of the basis of the next health revolution. But then I also have a tremendous respect for people who are in business and right, entrepreneurs, and especially the ones who are building something from scratch, which is just the most difficult thing to do. And I'm sort of trying to have both aspects in me. So I would say I'm probably an entrepreneurial professor is probably the best way to describe it.
And where does this entrepreneurial drive come from in you? Is it really shaped from the time in the US, or did you have any role models or inspiration before that sort of shaped your entrepreneurial genetics?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the sort of entrepreneurial aspect that just always came very natural to me. Whenever I had an idea, I wanted to just go basically and sort of turn it into reality, right? And that's kind of the entrepreneurial fundamental spirit. And then I just realized, okay, I'm also quite good at sort of the big picture, more theory aspect, and that of course drew me into my professor role now. But I still have this enormous, I think, drive to really not just think about things, but very quickly kick into action and make something happen.
And you did so when you came back here to Switzerland, to EPFL. 1 year after you came back and started your role here, you also created the Extension School. First of all, what is the Extension School, and what motivated you to initially start it?
Yeah, so the Extension School is EPFL's pitch for continued education. When I created it, it was specifically focused on digital skills, but it's now going also beyond that. But the basic idea was quite simple. It was just this premise that, okay, the digital technology is really fundamentally shaping our world, right? And that's the case not only since generative AI, but I think now it becomes even more visible to more people. And whatever jobs there will be in 20 years, we have no clue, right? Already today, the jobs are probably quite different from what you did 5 years ago. And so it's quite nice, being an EPFL student or an ETH student, that you get all these skills served to you, right? But what about everyone else? This model of, okay, we learn in the first part of our lives and then we have what we need. It's just now so rapidly outdated, and it becomes increasingly outdated the faster the wheel of technology development turns. And we need to be serious as EPFL, as ETH, because this is also part of our mandate. Actually, people sometimes forget. I have to sometimes remind people a little bit. It is, I think, point 2 even in the law of the mission of what EPFL and ETH are here for. Of course, we need to teach our students, but we also have the mandate to make sure that everyone else gets the skills they need.
And I think that the key word here is self-learning, to really also continue learning and self-learning. What role has self-learning played for you in your career so far?
Yeah, an absolutely central role. I mean, I was trained, if you look right on paper, I'm a biologist. Very little that I do today has to do with biology. Then I really got into the web, and this is, and then I got interested in infectious diseases, as I think is now known. And then I became this sort of digital epidemiologist. And then I came across, machine learning 15 years ago or so. And I was like, okay, I have no clue what this is, but this is clearly the future, so I need to learn it. Now I'm trying to get my hands on everything I can about generative AI. You have to learn all the time. I mean, I don't quite understand what life would be like if you don't learn. But I understand everybody's different. But I think in Switzerland, right, we were very much a learning society. Even though, there's many jokes here to be made, but in principle, right, we're in principle a very innovative society where people, I think our level of continued education is extremely high compared to other countries. And that's something I would like to push even more, or, to really enable people to get these skills when they need it, wherever they need it, just in time, right? To be much more flexible and to use this technology that we have to rethink how we teach.
Yeah, I think you're in the right spot to do so. And we could talk about many things with you. We could talk about science. We could talk about your startup, your entrepreneurship. But what I want to talk to you about is to zoom out a bit and to focus on the future of education and entrepreneurship in Switzerland, because I think there's no better person than you with your background, your experience to talk about that. In our prep call, you mentioned that things don't look as good as they should in Switzerland. So what do you exactly mean by that, and what is wrong in Switzerland? What needs fixing?
Yeah, one of the key aspects I think that needs fixing, and I think this became very visible in the pandemic, is that we are doing a really great job, I think, of creating this know-how and this knowledge, the technology, the science, and then making sure that the private sector gets access to that, right? Either through startups or through collaboration with companies. This didn't work so well, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, I listened also to your episode, for example, with Daniel Borel, right? If you imagine what kind of situation it was like then to create a startup and what it is today, it is so much improved, right? Today, you can do this, somewhat easily, and you really have all the resources that you need. It can still be improved, but it's much, much better. But there's, of course, an important aspect of life that's not a business, right? That are actually governmental jobs, if you will, and public health is one of them. But there are many others, right, that are just not businesses. So it's the government that has to step in. But I think we really have actually ignored that sort of transfer of the technology and the science to that public sector. And as a consequence, nowadays, I'm sorry to observe that the administration, not all of it, but large parts are often sort of 20 years behind the curve. Yeah. And I guess for a long time we said, it's what it is, right? It is Bern, and, it's a little slower, and, it's all right. But now we realize, no, it's actually not all right, right? This stuff could literally be deadly, right, in the worst case. And of course, that was just now a public health crisis, and then you have a war, and then you have a cybersecurity attack. I mean, things will get pretty serious pretty quickly, right? And if we as a society at the governmental level, at the administrative level, if we're not ready, right, to deal with this really at an excellent scale, then we're going to, I think, pay a heavy price. And that would be a real shame, because we do have all of this know-how from the universities, from the entrepreneurs, from the companies. And we need to make sure that this is also reflected then in how we run the country.
So we sort of have all the ingredients to make it, to improve things. But what do we actually need to do right now in your point of view?
Well, I think there has to be a more structural push towards that, right? I mean, this improved collaboration between, for example, the universities, the EPFLs and ETHs, and the industry, that didn't just happen automatically, right? There were very concerted efforts of the government saying, okay, we need to really get this straight, the Ino Suisse and so on. And the universities also said, okay, we need to do something. But there was really, right, this idea and this vision, right? We need to make sure that this transfer works really well. Yeah. So now we need to do the same, but into the public sector. Yeah. What this looks like is, I think, it has to be discussed. There's probably some things we can copy, but of course we also have to realize there's some things we cannot copy. Right? I mean, to give you a trivial example, but I think this is still something a lot of people don't know. I didn't know it in the beginning of the pandemic, I fully admit. The very basic distinction that as an entrepreneur, you can basically do whatever you want, unless it is forbidden by law, right? But of course, in the administration, it's the exact opposite. You are not allowed to do anything unless there is a legal basis. It is permitted by law. And that is such a fundamental change of what you can do and how you operate. So we have to take all of these things into account. But yeah, we have to get serious about it.
And there you often then come to this intersection, you know, what should be done by the state, by the government, which plays by completely different rules, as we just learned, and what should be done by private companies, by startups, by larger corporates. How do you see this intersection? Should we have more going towards the government? Should we take stuff away from the government? Or is the current setup and split quite okay, but we need to work on the individual players?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you will, right, it's to some extent the ultimate political question, where you position yourself on the left-right spectrum. I mean, this is very simplifying, but of course, where the left would say, you know, that this is more that the government should do, and the right would say there's more that the industry should do, and there we will, in a constant sort of, you know, not war, but, you know, war of ideas, right, of how this should work. And I think that's actually what it should be, because at the moment where we seem to have just 100% consensus, that's when I will get nervous, right? But we will, you know, through compromise, find the ideal spot as a country. But then, right, then I assume there's pretty broad consensus that whoever does what, you have to do this at a level of excellence, right? And that's where I think at the moment we really have to think about how we make that happen at the governmental level. Because for the companies, it's very simple, right? There's a very simple measure. Yeah, I mean, either you survive economically or you're gone. End of story, right? This is a very natural sort of a selection process. But of course, you don't have that in the government. But we need to somehow create the environment that you get the same dynamics, right? To
sort of have a forcing function that there needs to be development to a certain degree, improvements, actually.
Exactly. At the moment, right? So for the last 20 years, it was very safe. For example, if you work in the public health sector, well, it was very safe to not do anything on the digital side of things. And, you know, if you did and you tried, then, you know, you could be criticized, but gain practically nothing. So no wonder nothing happened. And, you know, so this is really this culture also that we have to develop in the country. We often speak about this, right? This culture of mistakes or Fehlerkultur, as they call it in German, where everybody said, oh, we really need this. It's so important. Now, you recall a couple of days ago, the Federal Office for Statistics made a small mistake in the election.
Right.
And then fixed it very quickly, which to me is exactly how it should work. Yeah. But wow, all of these articles came out that, you know, you need to cut the head of the director, and this cannot be. It was a semi-states crisis. And I was like, what did you guys just said 2 years ago about, you know, culture of mistakes? Yeah. I mean, come on, right? We have to do better in this area.
I assume that is a huge difference compared to what you experienced in the US with the failure, that, you know, just said, hey, this will not work, the startup, it's normal, you shut it down. Big difference in Switzerland. I feel we are great at building good quality, excellent product, excellent technology. But then when it comes to mistakes, or also to other things that we will talk about in a second, we are not that good. We're not the same. So is that something that we can actually change as a society? Or is it sort of too strongly wired in our DNA and culture here in Switzerland that we like to be a great second, but we don't think ambitious enough to be the global world leader?
Well, we have to. I don't think we have an option. I mean, I actually think secretly, right, we all want to be number one. It's in some sense actually very Swiss, right? It's like we you know, there's a reason why Roger Federer is sort of the role model of Switzerland. It's not just because he's good looking, but you know, he's like the champ, right? And that's what we actually sort of maybe secretly wish for many things, right? I think we're actually quite a competitive people. But we won't have the choice. Things are moving very, very quickly. And if we don't adapt, that's the biggest worry I have, right? That over time, things will just come very slow, and we were already sort of starting to feel comfortable with being fifth, right? Yeah. And not first. And then maybe in 5 years, maybe we're comfortable being 10th or 15th. And that's just, right? There's only one way, and that's down. Yeah. And so there we really have to say, no, we have to go back to wanting to be number one, right? That has to be the mission.
But that is also a big challenge because here the life quality is so insanely high, people just get more comfortable. How do you, keep them pushing and keep them aiming for more if they have everything and probably even more than they ever need?
Well, there I would really invite everyone to look at the US, right? That was exactly the narrative that developed, right? Best country in the world, everything is so great. And now when you look, right, how it's collapsing, how life expectancy is just going down, right?
Which is crazy.
Year after year. It's crazy. It's the only sort of developed nation in the world where this is happening. It's a direct consequence of the hubris and the arrogance of telling each other all the time we're the best country in the world. So we have to be extremely mindful. It is true that at the moment in Switzerland, the life quality is very high, but I wouldn't call it insanely high. There, I can point you to many aspects, right, about, for example, health. They're definitely better elsewhere. And so we have to be mindful, right, to not get too comfortable with that. It's not a given. What we have today is already in the books, right? It's from the decision that were taken 10 or 20 or 30 or sometimes even more years ago. And you want to ask yourself, how will your life be when you're 70 or 80? It's what we do now, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's a good reminder. It's not something you accomplish once and then you just keep it like a medal or a status. It's something you have to constantly earn and you have to put in the effort to not lose it.
And there's quite a delay, right? So you have to be mindful about not being fooled by the environment that you find yourself in today.
Absolutely.
This episode was brought to you by Google Cloud, a partner that needs no introduction. What you might not have heard of, though, is that Google offers a Google for Startups cloud program where they give you access to startup experts, technical training, business support, and cover your Google Cloud costs up to $200,000 for 2 years, or even $350,000 if you're an AI startup. Scale your startup faster and smarter with Google Cloud. Head over to goo.gle/Swisspreneur.
Another topic I want to talk about is you are at the intersection of entrepreneurship and education, of course. So I wonder, what importance does education play for entrepreneurs? Because you're always in this balance between learning and doing, sort of learning by doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's very important. I mean, an entrepreneur, I guess there are different phases, of course, also in life. I mean, when you're really into the full, deep entrepreneurship, I would say, there's very little time to learn anything other than just, trying to not die, right? Yeah. which entrepreneurship is. Yeah. So, and this is also, right, of course, the advice you get if you go, right, to Y Combinator. It's like, no, you don't have time to do this and that. And, right, you only have time to do two things, which is to improve what you're selling, your product or service, right? And to talk to your customers, right? That's sort of the mantra. And I think this is quite right. And thirdly, right, they added recently, you of course also need to look after yourself, right? Your mental health and your physical health, because it's an extreme sport, right? Entrepreneurship. So it's understood that you don't have a lot of education, but then many people in a company are of course not in that direct battle all the time, and they need to get upskilled as well. But here I think it's our job as a university, right, to say, how do we do this, that this is actually compatible with the life of an entrepreneur, right? This, online and just in time and short and micro, these kinds of things, and possibly also enable other ways of doing this. But it's our job to adjust to them, right? I think also not only to our students. For them, of course, we have more control. But then once people are out in the wild, so to speak, we have to adjust our offers that it works for them. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're doing to a certain degree, right? And I think it's also very powerful if you then combine the two, because the research here in Switzerland is very strong with EPFL, with ETH, and also other universities, of course. And if you then combine that with the commercial part, with entrepreneurship, that is, from my perspective, a winning combination. How do you see that?
I see that as well. It's in that regard that I'm so shocked now to see the political discussions of these budget cuts. where, I understand, right? Okay, everybody spent a lot of money during COVID. I think we're just like everyone else. And I understand that budgets are always a little tight and so on. But if you think about our future, right? If you think about where we are as a country and why, and also if you think about the current state of the world in terms of technology development, speed of technology, the impact of technology on everything, right? From finance to security, to then say it is now a good time to cut budgets in the education, research, and innovation domain, that strikes me as extremely short-sighted, because I fully agree with you. This is the magic sauce, right? This is the magic ingredient that makes Switzerland. And so I hope these things will be changed. I mean, the numbers are actually quite impressive. I know them from the ETH domain, where it was shown, right, that every franc you invest actually generates 5 francs, right? And if you tally up the employees, the jobs that are created with the startups, it's enormous, right? And so many countries would be happy to have such a system and would probably invest more. And we're now sort of trying to reduce it. This doesn't make sense to me. So I hope we'll get clarity there.
And if you look to the US again, to sort of bring these two worlds together and compare, education in Switzerland is much cheaper than in the US, but in the US, universities often also invest not only in startups, but also in other areas, or like real asset managers, so to speak, because of the political issues that you mentioned, budget cuts on a political level, etc. Is that something that we should also try to build up in Switzerland to get a bit more independent from the political agenda and back and forth there?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we already have a fairly good independence, and I think we should definitely keep that. What I think actually one of the key ingredients that is missing in Switzerland, if you compare it with the US, is the private universities and the philanthropic sector, right? If you think about many of the leading institutions are private institutions. If you look at these enormous donations that are made, right, from people like Bill Gates and they're now giving this 1.3 billion gift, right, which is larger than the budget, the yearly budget of EPFL. This is, of course, incredible sort of venture science capital that flows into the US. And a lot of the truly great things come from those pots of money, because they're completely, of course, detached from politics, which is rather dysfunctional in the US. And so, I'm not saying we should make our universities private. I think it's great that they're public, but I think our model is a bit too extreme, and there is not enough private initiative in the research and in the education sector, and the country would benefit from having more of that.
And I feel the technology is there, right? And also the big upside potential. But sometimes I also feel we're selling ourselves a bit short or undervalue by then just going for a fast exit. The first offer that we get as a startup company, we take it instead of then really building and going to the US, for example, and tackling the markets there. How do we sort of, get better at this lack of commercial skills and making things bigger to also have the return flowing back to Switzerland?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I always find it very difficult to be very judgmental there, because I always think, okay, I don't know how you can be, a kind of Mark Zuckerberg and get, a 2 billion offer at the age of 21 and turn it down. Yeah. I just don't know how you need to be wired, because I would for sure have accepted this, right? So
probably almost all of us.
It's very easy, right, for people to say, oh, Swiss people should just be bolder. Yeah. In general, right, I would say it's very much a question of role models and what you see and what the system expects from you. Yeah. I mean, once you have these things, right, you see people like this, and you can say, well, if he can do it, why can I not do it, right? And the more, I think, success stories you have where people went all the way to IPO, the more others will say, hey, then that's a path, right? Yeah. It becomes visible. It becomes achievable. And I think that's a little lacking. Of course, the fact that we're small doesn't help. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to be more visible about the successes when they happen.
Yeah. That's what we try to do with the podcast. Hopefully, a little drop on the hot stone there. What else do we need to change or add to Switzerland to really make it a real startup nation?
Well, I think we're already doing a lot of things very well. I always say when you actually look at Silicon Valley of what's been coming out in the past 10, 15 years, and at the time I was there, and of course I was often hanging out with European friends, we often joked and said, well, here is again another startup for which there is actually a functioning infrastructure in Europe, right? I mean, sort of Uber being the classical example. Of course, sometimes it's very useful to have an Uber, but there, right, it really became like, okay, we don't have functioning public transport, so that's actually taking care of that. So that, of course, makes it a little harder to be very innovative, but on that aspect, right? If already everything works so well, but so I think we need to even more push things also on the more deep tech side of things, right? Because that's of course where also the big growth is, and where you can say, look, this is never done, right? I mean, it's, I guess, nice if you live in the US and you have many sort of public problems that you can solve with your startup. And we just don't have that because some of the public sector works well. But the deep tech, that's where I think very much our DNA is. Also, if you look at the pharmaceutical sector, if you look at other sectors, and we're strong there and we should build on that. The question to me is a bit, how do we really get the tech sector stronger? That's, I think, an unresolved problem, and I don't have a good answer to that. But I do think that perhaps the Swiss model at the end will be to bring the tech sector into the different verticals, like pharmaceuticals, like nutrition, like things like that.
Oh, fantastic. And talking about technology, I also wonder your perspective on some of the emerging trends that you see in bio, AI, and also computer science. What are some of the hot topics that are constantly on your mind these days?
Well, of course, like everyone else, AI is constantly on my mind today, and I'm really worried that we are underestimating the impact this will have. And it's a challenge, right? I also look now at my kids who are currently 11 and 14, and in the near future will have to make some really important decisions about their trajectory. Yeah. And let's say, one of them wants to work in health. Will I suggest that they should go and study health, or will I suggest that they should actually go and study technology, because it will just completely overrun health? Yeah. So I'm a bit torn there what the good path is. In general, I tend to argue that you should probably, if you want to work in health, you should probably study health, and then somehow assume, and that's of course again where our job comes in as education, that you will get the necessary work packages, if you will, right? In terms of knowledge, so that you can work with the tech that will be available by then. Because the tech will change all the time, but the health problems are not changing all of the time. So it's hard to say. I guess we just have to be alert and really be much more vigilant about jumping on the new areas. That's a little looked down upon in Switzerland, right? When people move fast, then very quickly there's a criticism of, this is hype and so on. That's a huge mistake, because early mover advantages are enormous. And I think that's a message that hasn't always arrived in Switzerland as fast as it should.
Yeah, it's more being a bit ignorant than seeing a chance or opportunity.
Exactly. And then the counter argument is, look, we do it slow and then we do it right. And I fully agree, right? There's certainly much value in there. But there, as we can see now with, for example, what happens in the generative AI space. I mean, OpenAI really has shown everyone the playbook, right? To go in hard and quick. Of course, the quality has to be there. But then very quickly, right, they are now really the dominant force, and the others are sort of trying to understand. And there was just this dev day that has probably killed 10,000 startups in one fell swoop. So you really have to be on the edge there, right, and be fast.
Absolutely. And you really double down on this topic, because you also recently just took over the co-directorship of the new EPFL AI Center. How does this play into the future that you're trying to build?
Yeah. So the EPFL AI Center is now a recognition of the fact that what I just said, right? That pretty much everyone is working with AI, right? And there's perhaps still some labs that are not quite sure whether AI will affect them, but I think they just don't know because it will, right? It's impossible for me to imagine any research activity in the future that it isn't fundamentally changed by AI. And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, how do we do this properly? Because there again, many of the scientific results that will come out will be absolutely crazy, right, in comparison to what was there before. I think the Microsoft CEO said it well, right, when he said, look, he thinks, right, you can now compress 50 years of research into 5 years thanks to AI. That's, maybe he's off by a factor of 2, but I think overall the notion is correct, which means that, again, if you're now 2 years too late, you're a whole generation too late, right? Compared to what the past is. So the gains for those also in science who leverage this very quickly and successfully will be enormous. And the downsides for those who don't will also be enormous. And so it's really our duty to make sure that we coordinate this in a way that all the researchers at a school like EPFL have access to the top models and know-how that's elsewhere in the organization. So it's in some sense sounds a little boring. It's kind of a coordination problem, but like every entrepreneur knows, right? I mean, that level of execution is exactly where that makes the difference. Yeah. So that's the key first step. And the second step, of course, is also making sure we collaborate properly with the industry, with the public sector. And we manage, of course, Switzerland's super important. You have to bring the population along because at the end of the day, they have the political power, which is as it should be. But so it means we also have to focus a bit on that.
It really shows how you're doubling down on how you see the future and how you want to be part of it and shape it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I wish every university that doesn't double down on AI good luck. Because I doubt that there will be very relevant in 10 years.
And you mentioned the political level. I feel many issues that we discussed today are also really rooting on the political level, whether it's in the government or the organization itself, or, regulations coming in or discussing, etc. Would that be also a career option for you in the future to be active on a political level and have influence there?
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. For me, basically the definition of politics is at least 2 people in the same room. Yeah. Then politics starts, right? It doesn't matter what it is.
Sure.
So anyways, right, in some sense, we're already into politics all the time. The question is, would it make sense that at some point I start to think about a more formal sort of governmental activity? At the moment, for me, the answer is no, because I think the most leverage and impact I can have is where I currently am, right, sitting in that university system, very actively talking to politicians all the time and to entrepreneurs, rather than just honing myself into one role.
So you're not going to help them recruit the next federal councils that they're looking for at the moment.
Definitely, will definitely help them, and that's a big issue for me. And the other big issue for me is so federal councillors, right? I think it would be good if they were more technologically competent.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, one also has to realize that to some extent it's actually not their job, right? They're very much sort of representative of the overall population. Nevertheless, it would be good. But I think where we would actually have the key influence is in the positioning of the directorships of the different offices, right? So if you think, for example, right, I never really expected from, for example, Alain Berset to be technologically an absolute expert or a health expert. And I think nobody did, and nobody will necessarily for whoever comes in next. Mm-hmm. But the person who's running the federal office for health, right, or for public health, as we call it in English, they need to be absolutely at the top of their game. Mm-hmm. And if you go a little back in the past 20 years, and you look at some of the profiles of the people that are in these positions, I mean, they're very strong in certain areas, but it's very often strength in jurisdiction, right? And in law and in legal and in finance, but not in this, often not necessarily in the subject matter, which is crazy in my view, and certainly almost never technologically. And that has to change, right? We have to be much more serious about those roles. It used to be that basically a federal counselor would say, well, I want this guy, it's from the same party, and that has to be over, right? Yeah. I mean, that's not professional.
Absolutely. We have some homework to do, I can tell. Marcel, to wrap up the conversation today, I also have some rapid fire questions for you. I either give you different options to choose from or a short question you have to answer in one sentence.
Okay.
You ready?
Absolutely.
If you had to be one for the rest of your life, professor or entrepreneur?
I would choose professor.
Why?
Because I know I'm good at that, and entrepreneur is incredibly challenging and rewarding. But where I am at the moment, I'll be more useful as a professor.
Are you more of a night owl or an early bird?
Early bird, definitely.
Beer or wine?
Wine, I have to say. I mean, of course, my wife's a winemaker, but already had a sweet spot for wine before.
Great. And if you had to pick one, bio, AI, or computer science?
Well, now I would say AI, because it will just consume everything, and that's why I would pick that one.
How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
Last night, only 6.5, but this is very non-normal for me. I actually try really hard to get 8 hours per day. It's very important.
And what further education courses would you like to take yourself?
I'm currently devouring anything that is related to generative AI. I do have a soft spot for history, so I'm actually reading a lot of history books. That's sort of my soft, sort of non-technical education. But in terms of science or education, I'm just devouring everything I can on generative AI.
Great. And how do you combine and actually manage so many different initiatives, projects, and also roles that you have to make sure that you stay focused and productive?
Well, so the 8 hours of sleep are actually quite crucial. And, having a good family life is really important for me. It's just that balance. But mostly, to me, always the key ingredient has been just to work with people who are excellent and fun and trustworthy. And if you have that, then, the sky is the limit.
Amazing. United States or Switzerland?
Well, that's hard because, as I said, I have two chests. I will admit I am a Swiss boy, but I'm a US fanboy, but I'm ultimately a Swiss boy.
Fair. And the last one for you, Geneva or Lausanne?
Tricky territory.
I know, on purpose.
On purpose, yeah. So the correct answer is neither, because I live pretty much exactly in the middle. I very much love the region, but I just, for the life of me, cannot pick one favorite city.
A very good Swiss compromise to end the episode. Marcel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for everything you do for Switzerland, and keep pushing. And we want to see where the sky is the limit takes us.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.